at the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started and let other folks join us as they come. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the second training in our PATH series. My name is Amy White. I'm with C4 Innovations. I'm really happy today to be joined by my colleagues, Stephen Samra and Ken Crable. They have a wonderful presentation in store for you today, so I'm really excited for that. As a quick orientation or reorientation to our Zoom room, we have the chat box available. Please make use of that for any questions throughout. We do have participants muted as they come into the room. We ask that you keep yourselves muted when you're not talking. Please join us on video if you are interested. We love being able to see faces and interact. If you have any technical issues, our tech support person today is Lee, so please reach out to them in the chat box if you need any support with audio or navigating the Zoom room. They're happy to help with that. You'll also see the option for a live transcript that you could run throughout the presentation if that's something that would be helpful to you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen and Ken and let them get us started and introduce themselves. Take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. Delighted to be with you. My name is Ken, and I'm coming to you today from Seattle, Washington. And have to tell you that I don't know North Dakota real well, but when I was a kid, I was really enamored with state capitals, and I've been trying to visit all the state capitals in all the states. And so a few years ago, we drove through Bismarck, and I got to see your state capital. And I have to tell you, it was, I kind of was intrigued by it because it wasn't pretentious and sort of fancy and overwhelming like so many. And I kind of liked that. I thought it was pretty cool. It does have a big lawn, but otherwise it kind of looked like a regular building in some ways. I don't know. But anyway, that's my connection with North Dakota. Stephen, I know you have quite a bit more connection, so you can talk about that. Yeah, so I am a social worker by background. I've worked in homelessness most of my life, about 20 years in direct service, working out of a large shelter program, which became a multi-service center in Seattle. Did some street outreach, supervised people doing outreach, and have always had this really abiding interest in the outreach because it's really unconventional work, but it's work that is, I don't know, just kind of moves my soul. And so I'm grateful to have this opportunity to now come back and reflect with Stephen about outreach and also talk about these, what we're going to call best practices in outreach. And so looking forward to getting into that. Stephen, I wonder if you might want to say a word or two about yourself.
Sure, I'm happy to, Ken, and hi everybody. It's really great to be here. You know, I was listening to Ken describe his trip to Bismarck, and I can tell you guys that, you know, when I came there last year and I came to present it at the state conference, and I don't know what I was thinking. I grew up in northern Michigan. I understand sort of northern latitudes in the United States. I get that. But I've been living in Nashville for about the last 20 years now. So when I got on a flight, I was in shorts and a t-shirt, and I arrived in Bismarck and there was freaking snow on the ground. And I really messed this up. So yeah, I learned a valuable lesson, like wear your jeans and actually have some socks on with your shoes when you land. So the reason I'm here today with all of you and alongside Ken, let me just share this. So I did a lot of street outreach here in Nashville. I did, a lot of direct service. I was a SOAR provider. I did, direct outreach and direct service. And one of the people that I did a lot of work with, there were two folks who really stood out here for me. And I worked with literally thousands of people over the 7-ish years that I did outreach here. But the part of outreach for me it's about connection, and it's about supporting my brothers and sisters out there who often think that they're totally alone. And one of the folks I worked with for a long time, her name was Donna. And Donna and I met each other by using, I used dogs when I did street outreach because they're really great engagement tools. And Donna even told me years later that she thought I was 5'0" when I first rolled up on her. And the only reason that we engaged with each other is because she wanted to walk my dog. So Donna met Kylie, my dog, which sort of facilitated a long relationship. And to make a long story short, I worked with Donna for about 6 years. I met with her parole agent weekly. I supported her, advocated for her family, and ultimately got her to a SOAR appointment. It was successful in SOAR. We got her house. She was abstinent for the most part. And now, you know, with some health insurance, and it turns out that with that health insurance, she discovered that she had pancreatic cancer. And I took Kylie, my dog, down to meet Donna right before Donna passed, and spent an afternoon with Donna and with Kylie. And didn't know it at the time, but Kylie, the dog, had cancer of the jaw. And I drove home from that meeting, and 2 days later, Kylie and Donna both were dead. Both of them had passed. And it was a really painful period for me because street outreach for me wasn't just about supporting folks until I got them housed. And it's about mutuality, and it's about walking alongside somebody in their journey. This is very much a sort of a recovery principle, but it was very important for me in homeless service delivery as well. And if you haven't figured it out by now, I'm a person with lived experience of what I call the big five of behavioral health challenges. Most of those led to homelessness on and off, over a period of years for me. My primary diagnosis is an opioid and substance use disorder, but I also get to hang out every day with the sort of triple crown group of mental health pals, my bipolar disorder, my PTSD, and I have severe ADHD, and all of those combined give me some really good times, as you can imagine. And I'm a justice-involved person. I spent a couple of years in a state prison for a nonviolent cannabis crime, and that crime isn't even a crime anymore in that state. And I'm a trauma survivor. I've got an ACE score of 9. I have been homeless on and off throughout my life, and it's a direct result of my addiction and my mental health disorders. I've lived in a couple of camps, and I used community college to start getting myself back together. I've been in long-term recovery since 2000, and I started that by using medication-assisted treatment. I started on methadone. And I have switched over to Suboxone in the last 4 or 5 years. So I come at this work from a really personal place. I've been there, and I always have this goal of trying to improve the lives of people that I stand alongside of, because my job is to carry their hope until they're strong enough again to carry it themselves. So that's a little bit about me, and sorry to be so long-winded, but there's a lot to share. Ken?
Thank you, Stephen. I first met Stephen, I don't know how long it's been, 20 some years ago when I came to Nashville. And Stephen has been for me a mentor ever since. And he might even say I'm a mentor to him some ways too. So we have this mutual mentoring relationship going, I think, which is quite nice. So we're grateful to be here.
Yes.
This is kind of the truth in advertising part of what we want to do today. And just to make a statement about the why of this, this assertive, compassionate outreach and engagement is truly essential for people who are experiencing homelessness, to connect with them, help them get into services and resources. But that connection piece that Stephen was just talking about is so fundamentally important. And, outreach could be done potentially just through a street kiosk where you put a quarter in and say, tell me where services are, but it's so much more than that. It's very relational. So we're going to look at these best practices, the core values, purpose, the basics, and how is it that we can be very person-centered, trauma-informed, racially equitable, in the work that we do within the spirit of what we call partnership, acceptance, and evocation. And some of you who know motivational interviewing know that I totally ripped off that last phrase from motivational interviewing. So this is where we're going. These are the learning objectives we have for you. We recognize that we may not get through all of these, but this is our hope. So let's do it. Here's what we think we know about you. You're outreach workers, or you're supporting outreach workers, and you're doing this through the PATH program. But what else would you like to tell us about yourselves? We'd be delighted if you want to just put something in the chat box and include in that sort of why you, what is it you like about being an outreach worker, in a phrase or a sentence, if you're willing. Or if you're supporting outreach workers, what is it you appreciate about people who do outreach? So just give a moment to type that in if you would. That will be your way of introducing yourself to us, perhaps. And if you want to say something more personal, you're welcome to as well. I appreciate their willingness to look out of the box at new solutions to engage. Yeah, absolutely, Tammy. You know, it always has occurred to me that outreach workers are kind of their own strange sort of people. They have to be a little kind of antisocial, meaning they're willing to bend the rules and break the law sometimes in a good way, right? But the good part of that is they have to be creative and willing to put themselves out there, take some risks that we normally wouldn't. But they're doing deep work with people who otherwise would not be met. So anyone else, what you like about doing outreach, what you appreciate, anything. And my guess is that there are some of you who, like Stephen, have your own lived experience in some fashion or form, and that's partly of what has called you to this work. So, all right, well, for the moment, we'll move on. You've already heard enough about us, so we'll move beyond that, okay? What we'd like to do is just, I'm gonna ask you again to type in the chat box or unmute and just say something, but anywhere along the way. But one of the questions that constantly comes up for all of us in this work is, what does it mean to help? What does it mean to be helpful to somebody? What does it mean to support people in their recovery from homelessness, from addiction, from just trauma, and all of these things? And what's interesting is that there are many ways we might respond to this. But in particular, I like this one from Pema Chodron. She says, it all starts with loving kindness for oneself. And so as we think about this, we talk about self-care or self-compassion and all of these things. And I don't know if you're like me, it usually ends up being something at the end of the bottom of a to-do list that is way too long that I never get through, right? But I'm wanting to just emphasize that you taking care of yourself, showing up in a way that is present to people, you're centered, you're non-reactive, non-judgmental, all of that is part of a practice and a discipline of maintaining a sense of health and wellness, getting your sleep, getting good sleep, you know, paying attention to your body, your mind, and all of these things. So we're not going to go through self-care exercises here, but just to remember that that's really the starting point for being a helpful person, in my view. I wonder, Stephen, do you want to say anything to add to that at all?
I don't know why I was unable to unmute for a minute. Ken, I'm with you. It really is about being gentle to yourself and forgiving yourself, because when when people see you confident, calm, and really in the effort to support them, it shows. It just shows. So the self-care piece gets beaten to death, and we all of us say, "Gosh, practice self-care." It's really, really important. But as Ken said, we put it at the end of usually a training. So that folks, it's kind of wink, wink. Yeah, practice that self-care. It is so critical to keep us in the game We have the highest rate of burnout in the sort of helping professions. And I don't know about all of you, but I certainly want the long-term time to support my brothers and sisters. It's important to me. So.
And I'm looking at Ashley's comment here about how she really loves being able to just be out there, show respect and compassion. And to tie that back into this idea of self-care, unless we are self-respecting and self-compassionate, it's hard for us to convey that to others as well. So thank you, Ashley, for your comment there. So here's an invitation. I guess we did have a little exercise to invite you into just for a minute, but I'd like to ask you to just consider taking a nice, gentle, deep breath in for about a count of 4, however fast you want that to be. To take another breath that goes outward for a count of 6, so extending it a bit and feeling how your physique and physiology responds to that relaxation of the longer out breath. And then repeat that for a few times. And I'm not going to talk you through this, but let's just take about 45 minutes or so, and each of us in our own style, allow ourselves to, we're obviously breathing already, but pay attention to our breathing and see if we can adjust it in this kind of way. So I'll call you back in about 45 seconds. All right, thank you for doing that. And the part of the purpose of doing that is to remind ourselves that throughout the day, the one thing we can always do is take a little moment to step back and pay attention to breathing, or to listen to some music, or take a brief walk. But all of these things are critically important, as I know you know. So another piece that we want to focus on for a bit is just, how do we stay resilient? How do we stay, how are we able to continue bouncing back and doing work that is really very hard and challenging? We know that there are all kinds of reasons why we're not able to get people housed easily and readily, help them gain income, helping them get jobs. And all of that presses down upon us, as well as just the challenges of encountering people whose lives have been traumatized oftentimes. And so their way of approaching us is less than user-friendly at sometimes, right? So what I'd like to do is a very brief exercise, and again, invite your participation in the chat box. The first thing I'd like you to do, if you would, is just think about, what is it that you bring to the work and what brings you to the work? And we'll be a little more specific and just ask you, what are some of the strengths that you have individually that you know work well for you in the work that you do as an outreach worker, or whatever work you do? This isn't a moment, you can call it bragging if you want, but really it's just looking into the mirror and saying, yeah, this is something that for me is a gift that I have, a strength that I have, that, I don't do it perfectly, but it serves me well. And I think it's really nice to see what other people have to say for each other. So I invite you please to state a particular strength or two that you have. What are your strengths? I think for myself, I'm fairly patient and calm in how I go about things, and that serves me well. I don't get sort of flustered easily. Stephen, what are your strengths?
I can yak till the cows come home. I it's chameleon. I can talk to anybody. And I think that's a really valuable strength.
Anyone else? Unmute or speak up. I've been told that I'm empathic and I also love to engage people. Wonderful, Wendy. Yeah. The fact that others tell us about the strengths we have is really confirming for us. And hopefully we can see them in ourselves too, right? Jerry,
Yeah.
thanks for your comment there. Yeah.
Good
Wonderful.
catch.
Patient, resourceful, experienced. Yeah, those are all great examples. Let's try another. What are your core values that you would say help to guide you in the work that you do, help you get awake every day and feel like, yeah, this is really important, valuable work that I do? What are your core values? Just name one if you wish. Feel passionate, yeah, about what I do. And so passion, if you'll allow me, if you think about the word passion itself, it actually literally means suffering. When we think about the Christian tradition of Passion Week, it's the week of suffering, right? And so one way to think about being passionate or compassionate is you're willing to suffer, to give up things in order to pursue what it is that's important to you. And so if you're compassionate, you're willing to enter into other people's suffering, their homelessness, their struggles with substance use disorders, their mental health disorders, systemic issues and systemic disorders. And so being passionate is a wonderful thing. And Lisa, non-judging, yeah. I have to tell you for myself, I'm not sure I know how to be non-judgmental, but I am able to push my judgment to the side long enough, right, to allow it to appear that I'm being non-judgmental. But maybe that's just me. Advocacy, transparency, yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Mike says, I know anyone can end up in this situation. I'm not there to judge why, not there to help. I am there to help no matter, yeah. Yeah, what a wonderful thing. You know, it's part of that whole thing that we talk about around trauma too, is instead of wondering what's wrong with you, we wonder, well, I'm curious what happened to you that created conditions for this to happen. And honesty, yeah, honesty, transparency. What about this one? Significant people who inspire you regularly or have inspired you. Maybe you've never met them in your life. Maybe they lived thousands of years ago. Maybe they live with you. Maybe they're in this room. You don't have to name them by name if you don't want, but I think it's just helpful for us to remember, in order to stay resilient, that we have other people flowing into our stream, our river, who are there supporting us and keeping us going. I have a mentor, Craig Rennebaum, who was very much somebody who I have turned to. He wrote a book called Souls in the Hands of a Tender God, and it was a really wonderful, beautiful book he wrote. Stephen, how about you?
So I've got a bunch of stuff. I was looking at the chat and I was thinking, there's honesty, non-judgmental, advocacy, and transparency. What comes up for me in all of these things are the same things that happened to me in my recovery journey. And it's really around honesty, ethics, fairness, not betraying people, just living that sort of honest and ethical life. And those were all things I couldn't do in active addiction. I couldn't do it. My lifestyle wouldn't allow that. And when I entered recovery, there actually were two, it's weird, but I dropped out of school in the 7th grade. And oddly enough, the significant people who've inspired me were two different teachers. One caught me hitchhiking as I was skipping school one day. I must have been about 14 or 15. And he pulled over and gave me a ride. And in his car, he said, I don't care what you do with the other instructors. I don't care how much other classes you skip. You will be in my class and you will be there every day because, Stephen, you can do it. I never missed another class with that guy. And to this day, I remember his "you can do it" mantra, and I believe that. The second one, my college professor, Stefan Kolban, who had come here, escaped from Romania, and taught me everything I ever wanted to know about geology, and how to be a better person. So there you have it.
Now you're a rock star.
Look at me go.
We can also look at challenges that have strengthened us. Stephen has shared a lot about challenges he's faced. You yourself have had those. The beauty about those challenges, not that they're beautiful, but what can happen is we can actually experience post-traumatic growth, if you will, in which we become even stronger than we were before because of the lessons learned and the wisdom gained. And so that may well also be part of your river of resilience. And then the last of these is this notion of your purpose or your call. You know, what gets you out of bed every day? And if you want to type something in the chat box, you're welcome to do so. I'm going to take a moment to close a window because I'm having a lot of airplane traffic all of a sudden. Stephen, carry on if you want.
I am happy to do so. Your purpose, you know, when I saw this this slide, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago when Ken was putting this together, and it instantly, this is where my head went. There's a Stephen Stills song that I heard after I had gotten out of prison, and was really wondering what in the heck I was going to do now with my life, since I had a felony conviction. And back then, you know, I thought all doors were closed. I heard this song, and here's the verse. Hurt myself bad on a run through the desert. I threw a shoe and I took a bad fall. I long for the peace that the ancients bring me. Murmur of the lowlands shut my jaw. Help me, sweet Jesus. I'm weary from the journey. I need to tell my brothers what I saw. And I've been doing this now for almost 20 years. And the only change that I've made is that I've expanded it to, I need to tell my brothers and sisters what I saw. That's my purpose. That's why I'm here with you guys today.
Stephen, I just so appreciate and love listening to you and all these things that come to mind that aren't scripted necessarily. They come to us. And what it reminds me is when we're doing outreach with folks, we never know what's going to land with people. We can say things that we think are incredibly wise and pertinent, and they go right past. And then there's a small something we do. I'm reminded, I worked in a shelter for many years, and there was one person who was really a challenge to engage, and it was kind of menacing even, but I kept trying. And then one day he kind of came to me and said, you know, Craybill, he didn't say it just like this, but I think I could talk to you. And I said, oh, how's that? And he said, well, I've noticed that when you go to the bathroom, you don't always use the staff bathroom. Sometimes you use the bathroom that the residents are using in the shelter. And he didn't say it like this, but he said, that makes you cool. That makes you one of us, kind of thing. It was like, who knew, right? Who knew that that would be kind of an engaging tool? So yeah, anyway. What are we talking about here? Well, it turns out that there are many ways to think about outreach, no one agreed upon way. We know that outreach is in the eyes of the beholder. If you work at a hospital and go to a clinic, that's outreach. If you work in a clinic and go to a shelter, that's outreach. If you work in a shelter and go out on the street, that's outreach. And you know, if you only do street outreach, but you go out in the country and go to camps, that's another form of outreach, and it just keeps going. It's all outreach, but it's going out and beyond, particularly leaving the four walls and going to invite people into not only relationship, but also to, you're a representative of the community actually in going out like that and saying, hey, we notice you're out here and we care. Sometimes outreach is about going out and educating others in the community. I hope that you have the opportunity to do some of that. And so there are many, many different ways that we can think about outreach. For the sake of our conversation here today, we're going to focus primarily on that kind of face-to-face outreach to people who are out there. So we're talking about leaving the walls and meeting up with people who are invariably alienated, disconnected from mainstream services and support. There are many reasons for that alienation, as you know. Some of it's just based on systems that don't give regard to people who are marginalized, and they literally push them to the side. Some people experience racist and discriminatory policies and interactions with people that drive them to stay away. Other people have been struggling with substance use disorders, and the only kind of treatment they got was to a very highly confrontative and shame-based kind of approach, and on and on. So we're there to help mend fences a little bit, and to also provide a different face of the community than what they might have experienced before. And we know that building strong relationships is essential. I will say this, one of the best ways to build a strong relationship, however, is to go out and say, would you be interested in working with me towards getting your own place to live? That cuts through a lot of things, right? Now, the fact is that people are going to say, huh? Yeah, are you kidding me? And they're going to think, okay, I've been promised a lot of things in life. Who are you to make it different, right? But if we can actually find something that people actually want and need, and housing almost always is something on the top of the list, we don't have to spend lots and lots of time building trust, as they say, because we can build trust through what Stephen was talking about, being accountable to people, being honest, being transparent, maybe telling part of our story. And then just to say that outreach strategies really do need to be personalized, and recognize that when we encounter people, we're encountering a unique human being who's had their unique experiences, and what it is they're seeking, wanting, hoping for isn't necessarily going to be exactly the same as the person next to them. And so this is very much a person-centered approach. Stephen, I want to, feel free to just interrupt me, but I just want to make sure you're having opportunities to chime in when you want to.
I do appreciate that. And I want to try and be succinct, but one of the things that comes to mind for me always is around cultural competency and then cultural proficiency. And what that means as, excuse me, as a person who does street outreach, because there are times when we may not be the best fit. And so, that piece is really, really critical. The other piece that I think sometimes gets overlooked is around suspending judgment. And all I mean by that is that, all of us come to the work, to, our lives with biases and, with just things that are, we don't want to do. And I'll give you a quick example. My entire family history is steeped in severe alcohol misuse. And so when I did street outreach and I had to engage with people who had been drinking, that's a real challenge for me. There was a lot of violence and a lot of trauma in my life around alcohol. And I recognized that I was not going to be able to, just ignore that. But what I could do is suspend that judgment, and suspend it long enough to have the engagement and to do it in a way that didn't use my bias, my own trauma around the alcohol misuse as a way to somehow punish this individual in front of me. It was really important. It still is. The other thing that I think is also really important is to manage your expectations and meet people really where they're at. I'm going to say this over and over today. but we're seeing an individual as a snapshot in that moment in time. But you have to remember that that person is much more than what you're seeing, whether that's, a homeless person or a person with a substance use disorder. They're also a son or a daughter. They may be a dog lover. there may be all kinds of things around that individual that would make the person the most beautiful tapestry. And all we're seeing is this moment of them experiencing homelessness. So we want to meet those folks where they're at, and we want to manage our own expectations about what is possible as we build our engagement strategy and our, looking to achieve that mutuality where we're actually working together with somebody in order to support that journey out of homelessness. Ken?
Thank you, Stephen. One of the favorite articles that came out many, many years ago that describes outreach is titled "To Dance with Grace." And you have a little bit of an excerpt here that describes what Sally Erickson and Jamie Page were talking about. But they talk about outreach and engagement as an art form. And I think that's very apropos, and it's a dance. And I don't know about your experience of dancing with somebody. I'm pretty good at stepping on other people's toes and going in the wrong direction and that kind of thing. But nonetheless, if you have a good attitude about you and a good intention, most people are willing to still tolerate that and continue dancing. And so outreach is kind of an awkward dance oftentimes, but it is that. And what's beautiful is when even there's some semblance of synchronicity, of being in sync together. That is an experience that is uncommon for people who have had a lot of trauma in their lives. It's a disassociation, a dissonance that they experience. So anything we do through our words, our facial expressions, our just way of being with people that creates this connection, this synchronicity is really, really powerful. And it can be done in small doses. It doesn't have to be, it's the more the better, of course, but I've heard Stephen say this, I've heard other people say this. You can remember the people you met out there who joined with you and believed in you and didn't try to bowl you over. And they stand out very much so. And so I love this idea of the dance. So Stephen, I wonder if you'd be willing to riff a little bit on these underlying beliefs that we talk about in outreach. I'm just going to put them up here, and I'll chime in.
And so, we know that homelessness is not a choice, right? I think that the perception out there is to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I just said, remember that you're catching people with this snapshot in time, right? And we're trying to meet them where they're at. We're trying to manage those expectations. And the saying, "It takes a village," really nowhere else is this more true than in ending homelessness, because there's a lot of complexity to being homeless and then trying to extricate yourself out of it. It's not a choice. And it's fundamentally usually about funded finance, money, and housing availability. So a lack of income and housing. So people don't normally choose to be homeless. And usually what ends up for them when they are is that it's because they didn't have an adequate income and they didn't have access to affordable housing. Look, you can't rent any place in America on a minimum wage job today. You can't do it. Not a one-bedroom apartment. You can't do it. So if you're asking people to work 40 hours a week and remain in homelessness, you can kind of understand why they don't want to do that, and they would be seen as choosing to remain homeless. Kindness and clean socks aren't going to cut it. They are great, and it's how we can keep people interested and, you know, connected to services and to us as outreach workers. But ultimately, what if you want to end homelessness, you have to put people in homes, period. We need to engage people in a really respectful way. We want to come at those immediate needs, right? We want to address those immediate needs. And we want to make sure that if they need some social service support, treatment resources, that we're able to point them in the right direction without coercing them to actually do those things. I can remember, 90 meetings in 90 days. You bring the sheet to me that shows that you signed off, or the person at your NA or AA meeting has signed off on it. And if I see that you've done that over 90 days, I'll think about getting you housing. Folks, I couldn't live a week out on the street today without something to numb my pain. So asking people to do things like 90 meetings in 90 days is an exercise in futility for most of us who have experienced homelessness. So again, alleviate the immediate needs, address them, refer them when you can to treatment, to additional resources, but stand alongside them with the understanding that the goal is to get them housed, period. However long that takes, that's our goal. All this other stuff, it doesn't change a person's homeless status. It's great stuff, and we need to do it, but it doesn't change the homeless status. Ken?
Yeah, it reminds me, Jim O'Connell is a physician in Boston who, with the Healthcare for the Homeless Project, and I remember him saying that if he were able to write a prescription for people experiencing homelessness, and he did a lot of outreach, that prescription would be for housing. And then housing, of course, then becomes a place where you can let go of the stress of survival living and begin to reflect on your life. And the housing itself isn't sufficient because you want to turn it into a home, right? A place where you feel a sense of belonging and other people can come and go and you have a place to hang your hat. But there is a problem with housing, and I'll just bring this up, and I bet you've all noticed it. You've all probably helped people get into housing only to see them turn around within 72 hours and leave, right? And so we need to prepare people for housing in terms of helping understand what is it that what concerns, if any, do you have about moving in? What are your thoughts about how you're going to manage situations when people knock on your door at 2 a.m.? I mean, there are issues that come up, right? And then there's the one that I'll never forget, this interaction with a man who had gotten into housing, and he had done a lovely job of creating his apartment into this place of his own. And then he just kind of turned to me and he said, Ken, here's the problem. Now all my memories are coming back. And it was as if he was saying, now that my basic needs are met and I'm feeling this settledness, it's still some of the I still have stuff to deal with, right? I still have, and for him it was traumatic memories, but it was that sense that housing itself is so important, and it itself, though, is a foundation platform, if you will, for living your life. And so to the extent that we can engage with people in that process, it's very satisfying. So we know there are nuts and bolts to outreach, and it's the question of who, where, safety strategies, what goes in the backpack. We actually didn't really intend to spend lots of time with this because we figured that you figured it out already, but just wondering if any of you would be willing to unmute or to pipe up, particularly around the difference between maybe more rural and urban setting outreach, but anything else here. Anyone want to comment, or maybe you have a question or something? Just leave a little open space for that.
Ken, I think one of the things that I was looking for in the webinar was just to have some examples of outreach, because we are a fairly new group of workers, fairly new clarity for path and, you know, how a program is ran successfully in a rural state. And I know Stephen and I have talked about this because he's done outreach in rural areas. So I think that would be really helpful if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. And when you say examples, can you say a little bit more specifically what the details of what you'd like to hear about?
Like where to provide outreach, what technically is specifically outreach? Because I mean, you know, the PATH coordinators are in offices in the human service centers, which are our community-based mental health centers. And so what would define outreach at a shelter for them, or, you know, different ideas and definitions would be helpful. I think like just a basic overview, and then maybe that would, you know, spur some more questions, more specific questions.
Yeah. And so the things we have listed here, maybe we can go into a little bit more as part of that. And well, yeah, let's start with who for a moment. My answer to that is any human being who's living and breathing, who has a passion for being helpful to other people and is in recovery or well-grounded at least. I want to make a plug here that, and Stephen, I know you can say more about this, but people who are involved in outreach who also come with lived experience in being in recovery is a huge benefit. And so maybe Stephen, if you want to say a little more about that.
I do, and Ken, thank you. And you know, when I think of who, where my head went was to, you know, the PATH sort of definition of, you know, who's eligible in terms of experiencing homelessness. But when I heard you come at it, it was who does the street outreach. It's a little bit different, and I'm with you that you know, an outreach worker it almost feels at times like the outreach worker is expected to walk on water. And by that, I just mean, you know, we need to be flexible, creative. We've got to be, you know, dependable, adaptable. There's a whole list of things that those of us who've done street outreach, we do naturally. But when you label it all out, you're like, oh my God, I can walk on water. And the truth is that for those of us with the lived experience of homelessness, the lived experience of recovery, in many ways, what we're doing is sort of re-experiencing the things that have happened to us. And we get to do it now with an eye towards what was successful for us, how we've supported others on that journey, and what is likely going to be required to support this individual. That's an awful lot that we're asking of an outreach worker, and it's what we do every day. So when you think about, you know, coming at street outreach, couple of thoughts. First, if you're hanging out in the shelter or you're sitting in an office waiting for individuals to show up to you, that's not outreach. Outreach is going out into the world and looking for individuals, whether you're doing this with the structure of the VI SPDAT, is searching for the most vulnerable in your community, or you are just out doing street outreach, identifying where people experiencing homelessness might be, and then engaging them in trying to just initiate a relationship. There are 5 components to that, right? And this is coming from the Interagency Council on Homelessness. They'll tell you: locating, finding those who would otherwise remain unserved. That's a really important piece, because it means that if you show up at the shelter, you're kind of wasting your outreach time. You can find services in a shelter. We want you on the bricks. You need to be out in the fields. You need to be out in the community. And I get that the rural setting is much more difficult. We'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. It is much more difficult to do outreach, and it's more difficult for 2 reasons. One, the challenge of identifying and finding people, absolutely. But also, when you are a provider and you are running outreach teams, one's in an urban area and one's in a rural area, it's hard for you to reconcile the fact that the rural area is usually more expensive and has less contact. Why is that? Well, because there's a lot of distance. There's a lot of work just to get to the location, and you might find some folks, you might not. In an urban environment, it's a lot different, right? It's a lot easier to identify. It's a lot easier to set up a predictable route. It's a lot easier to engage often. So those pieces matter, right? Are you doing urban or are you doing rural outreach? Engaging people into a trusting relationship. What does that mean? We're not there to be this isn't a sort of friendship. We're there to provide a service, and ultimately we end up developing a friendship, or at the very least a sort of a mutual respect and relationship together, so that we can walk along together and address some of the big challenges that are facing people who are experiencing homelessness. An ID, which is the most simple thing that you would think of. I think anybody who does homeless outreach recognizes if you don't have ID today, you don't have anything. You're not even a human. You're not even a person without that ID. And if you weren't born in North Dakota and you show up at a North Dakota social services organization or agency and you ask to get ID, the challenge of trying to get your birth certificate is so great if it's from another state and you don't have ID to prove it's you asking for that. It's next to impossible to do that. It's so challenging to make that happen. So just in trying to build the relationship, identifying who the folks are, is a massive endeavor. Then we assess the need. What is happening in front of us with our individual? We know that the housing is a major need, but remember, we just talked about meeting immediate needs first, and often because that's what we have to do. It's how we start an engagement. I used to carry with me, I carried a backpack. I always had like McDonald's, the little breakfast burritos. I carried a giant bag of cheap tobacco. I know that there's some issues around that. I get it. But it was a way to get engagement happening with folks who otherwise wouldn't give you the time of day. So we've got to assess the need and try to meet some of that need right there on the spot, to the best that we can. We need to link folks to housing and support services. It doesn't mean that they're going to get housing today, but there's nothing more hope-inspiring than to have an outreach worker show up, treat you with respect and dignity, help you identify just find the places I'm supposed to go to get X, Y, and Z done for me. That is a huge barrier for a lot of people, and they struggle trying to navigate their own steps around that. And then finally, really following folks into placement. So I'm going to give you another little story. I spent years here in Nashville doing street outreach, and one of the people that I think is the most memorable to me is my buddy Bone. And I met Bone on a park bench here in downtown Nashville. I had a predicted route. Every day I followed the exact same route, and I did it because if somebody wanted to catch me and they didn't know my phone number, didn't have a phone, didn't know how else to find me, they knew that I would be at the Downtown Partnership on Tuesday at noon. They knew that, and folks would wait for me there. So having that really predictable route allowed people to capture me, to find me. That was a huge deal for folks, just being able to connect with me. The work I did with Bone, he remained on the park bench. He was morbidly obese, in really poor health. He was dying on that bench. And he watched me for a month. I came into that park every day. I did my outreach and engagement work. I did a lot of stuff in that park. And finally, Bone one day said, "Hey, come here." I wandered over to him. I sat down. He said, "Listen, I've been watching you, and I think you might be the real deal. So I'm going to tell you what. I'm going to give you 3 chances." And he said, "If you fail me like all the other folks have, I'll take everything that you have, but you can kick rocks as far as having, any interaction with me." And I took that as a challenge. And to make a long story short, over about 6 years, I put Bone through the SOAR program. I was able to get him SSDI. I was able to get him the housing voucher. We got him housed. What also came with SOAR is medical insurance. Thank God. And as soon as we got medical insurance for Bone, that man was instantly in the hospital and getting his illnesses treated. And it turns out we went over years like this. Bone contracted colon cancer at almost exactly the same time. I shared earlier that Donna contracted pancreatic cancer. And I had taken Donna and Kylie, the dog, a week before I took Kylie down to meet with Donna for her last time. And we went and saw Bone in hospice. Bone was unresponsive, although I will say that he did, when Kylie was licking his hand, because I lifted Kylie right up and put him on his bed in hospice. You can imagine how that went over. And so when Ken said we do sometimes break the law, I think that might have been part of the breaking the law thing. But nobody gave us any guff over it. And ultimately, Bone was able to, I could see his hand patting Kylie. When Bone passed, I had him cremated. I had to take care of all of the things that he wanted done. And so I did. I cleaned his house out. And he asked me to do it personally. And the reason he asked me to do it, I found out after he passed, is because when I did clean his house out, his apartment, I learned that many of the things that Bone had said had been embellished or, a bit of a lie. And I think he understood that I wouldn't judge him for that. And I didn't. I just understood it. And the last thing I'll just say about this is that Bone was a traveler, and he was a real hobo, got on a railroad car, and he's been all over the country. And that was his dream. And so I took his ashes last year, 2019. I took his ashes and I went to Yellowstone Park, and I went to the Continental Divide, and I took his ashes and I poured half of them on one side of the Continental Divide, and I poured half of them on the other side. And I know that now he's journeying in 2 different directions, one towards the Pacific, one towards the Atlantic Ocean, and the man will travel long after I've left this planet. That, to me, is the full package of street outreach, mutuality, what it means to support somebody, what it meant to locate, to engage, to assess those needs, to link them to the services, and to follow them in placement. And the bigger thing for me is meeting and making an amazing friendship with another human being. So I know that when we talk about, give us some examples about what outreach looks like, I can absolutely do that, and I can tell you what needs to be in the backpack. I can tell you, safety strategies. Don't go alone. Don't leave at 5, et cetera, et cetera. I can do just tons of that. But I think it's the most important piece that I can share with you is it's about building that relationship with somebody and then supporting them through each one of these steps: location, engagement, assessing, linking, and following them into placement. Those 5 pieces will serve you in every bit of the outreach that you do. And Ken, I'll stop there because I could go on and on and on about this topic all day. And if you don't stop me, I will.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. What you just described was kind of, like you said, the full meal deal, and it is quite a privilege. The fact is that you also, and others of us, have walked with people where we've only had small bits and pieces of pieces of touchstones in people's lives, maybe to help them get connected with a SOAR worker, or to help them connect with something else. So outreach, of course, entails all of that. But I think the stories we remember are the ones where we actually can see kind of progress being made and people's lives getting better. But I think we also have to rest in the belief that every time we touch somebody's life and do it in a respectful manner, it's a difference maker, and it becomes cumulative. Tammy, I don't think we've actually answered your question, but maybe. But
I'm about to.
Oh, you are? Okay. Because I was.
I am. And the reason it took me a little bit is because I had to go back to a couple of other presentations I have. So I want to just start thinking about, particularly about rural outreach. So we know mainstream services that are struggling, but they often have an interagency coordinating committee that's already in place. And those groups can be really important allies. Doesn't always happen, but it can be a great ally, and they can be sort of supportive in the approach to serve folks with the most severe housing needs. We know that they're often underfunded, particularly in rural areas. And we know that service delivery, remember when I said earlier that, you know, the difference between urban and rural is rural, less contacts, more expensive because you have farther to go. It's because it's complicated by long distance between population centers, no public transportation. The numbers are much lower than urban outreach contacts. It's just the way it is. There's fewer congregation spots that exist for us to go to. I could go to the downtown park in Nashville and there'd be 30, 40 people there at all times. When I came outside of Nashville and I started doing some outreach way out in the rural areas of Tennessee, it got way different. And there, normally what you would do, what you would find, I might find 2 or 3 people in a campground. That might be a big, big congregation of people experiencing homelessness. And even in a campground, they didn't want folks to know that they were experiencing homelessness. So in order to approach them, couldn't do that in sort of that traditional outreach role. How do I know that? By trial and error, because I screwed up when I went out there. I had a big old sign on the side of my car that talked about my outreach, and nobody would come to me. Well, I understood why. The per engagement cost at outside rural areas, a lot higher than urban outreach. And we got to think outside the box when we're doing this, the rural outreach. It's just so much different. Even determining where and who to engage, because you want to find the folks who are experiencing homelessness, but because it's a rural community, you got to find the folks who might be providing services to them that they don't even know. Here's an example. When I do rural outreach, the first place I want to go is to a hardware store, and the second place is to a church. The hardware store will have things like sterno, duct tape, things that people need to build, to maintain a camp, okay? And a church is normally where folks will show up in crisis, looking for food, hoping to find, some sort of resource or support that would allow them, to either get out of the current homeless situation they find themselves in, find some hope, at least pray about, what might be possible. There's some advantages in rural communities that also can strengthen outreach and engagement. Everybody knows everybody. Now, you guys know that's a double-edged sword, right? Information about those experiencing homelessness may really be part of the collective knowledge. When I was living in California, there used to be a giant hobo camp. That's what it was called. They called it a hobo camp. And it was on the railroad line. The whole community knew that, a bunch of folks were living in that camp experiencing homelessness. When outreach workers come from the community, and again, I want you to think about people with lived experience of homelessness, and also people who've done, peer support training, people in recovery from addiction, from mental illness. And those folks are aware of local geography. They know the camps and they know the gathering spots, and they know the expectations and cultural norms within that community. And they can, and they often do, build and create these sort of strategic partnerships that help promote outreach and manage engagement. Because in those rural communities, you're not going to have a lot of opportunity to catch somebody like I did with my brother Bone sitting on a park bench, okay? Rural communities also pride themselves on taking care of their own. We know that. I grew up in a rural community. Look, you pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You keep your business private. We take care of our own. And outreach specialists absolutely need to understand that. And they need to know who is doing what, where, and how. And by that, I mean, who's doing the church feeds? Where's the clothing drives? Is there stand downs that are happening for vets? You know, where's the local job fair? Do you have day labor? If you've got day labor and an outreach business card isn't attached to some cork board in that place, you're missing a huge opportunity. So, you know, if we talk about challenges in rural areas, I just said, large geography to cover. It's really expensive. We have a limited outreach staff, usually one person. It's really challenging to find people in remote areas. It's really challenging to find people who are couch surfing or doubled up. There's no infrastructure in the community, and there's very few partners to cover a large area, and then you have limited resources. Ultimately, for many, they just throw their hands up in despair, right? Because the challenges are so difficult. There is, and I'm going to continue, right? Because I'm going to get to some better stuff. But the truth is, it's this isolation of folks that are either homeless or at risk. And, you know, this lack of having a place to go, being able to access somebody who can tell them where the services and supports are, if there are any that exist in the community, because often they don't. So, you know, do we have a soup kitchen? Nah. Do we have a day shelter? Probably not. What about a library? Libraries are usually a good place to make sure that you've left an outreach card. You should engage with the librarian and let them know if they see somebody experiencing homelessness or they think might be experiencing homelessness. Before you call the cops, here's my card. Call me. I'll come help. I'll come support. I'll come do what I can. We know that there's no resources, right? That even in the mainstream systems, rural areas struggle much more so than urban areas. And, you know, there's a lot of turnover in outreach, particularly in rural areas. It's just as common in urban areas as well, but it's often because outreach workers earn, you know, are at the bottom of the sort of pay scale. And so they, you know, when they're really good, they're asked to go do other things, and they often do. And then, you know, kind of one of the final things is really around language, right? Linguistic and cultural isolation, particularly among immigrant populations. You know, I used to pick apples years and years and years ago up in Empire, Michigan, and it was a big migrant camp, and there was a lot of Hispanic individuals there. And, you know, I don't know that they could have, there would have been any engagement, any support, because nobody would talk to the workers. So you've got this fear of deportation, you've got this fear of violence, there's stigma that, you know, that is attached to immigrant populations, legal or illegal. There is a host of different subcultures that you're dealing with. All those things exist in rural outreach and exist in trying to provide services to people experiencing homelessness in rural areas. So how do we battle those barriers? Well, one of the things we do is make sure that our outreach team, our supervisors, and our program managers, they understand the needs of the target populations and what they're up against in those rural areas. You want to identify a person with the trust and respect of that target community. And, you know, this is when a formerly homeless peer who's had some training, either in peer support or in homeless service delivery is an amazing connection, because it will foster relationships in that community and with the local population of people experiencing homelessness. You have the community members who are pulling their hair out. How do we resolve this? They're looking for somebody. And then you have people experiencing homelessness who don't know where to turn. They're looking for somebody. We can meet that need. We need to foster and advocate for a high level of stakeholder and provider involvement. Part of the challenge is it's a service desert out there. So, we need providers to sort of step up. It's kind of hard to do that because of the funding issues, but the more we make people aware, particularly those who are holding purse strings, about the challenges of rural outreach and engagement, the more likely we are to see modest increases in funding. I don't think we'll get all the money we need, but we can certainly argue the case that we're going to need more for this particular work. We want to develop relationships with the services and agencies that engage or that work with those who might be homeless or at risk. And here's all I want to tell you. Think outside the box. Park Service, Department of Natural Resources, the sheriff, the state police, railroad authorities, churches, hardware stores, campgrounds, the campground hosts that you find in, almost every national campground has a host that hangs out for the whole year. Those people can point you to people experiencing homelessness in rural areas that would never come up to you. They prefer, whether they're proud or they're scared, it doesn't matter. They wouldn't come to you. So when you are working rural outreach, we got to think way outside the box, particularly if we're the ones doing that actual outreach. Now, you can tailor, you want to tailor that outreach in a way that is going to be cost effective and most effective at snagging, it sounds terrible, at snagging folks and being able to show some engagement. And I get that, this is sort of checking the box here, but if we're going to ask for additional funding, then we need to show that there's actually homeless individuals who need our help. And if we can't find them, if we don't know where to look for them, and if we haven't incorporated the rural communities access points for people experiencing homelessness, we're missing it. So we're going to focus on those specific needs of people experiencing homelessness because we want to develop and build this sort of connection of trust and respect. We must, and this is in a rural area, provide survival resources. This is why I said hardware stores are the bomb, and you should introduce yourself to people at the hardware stores that are clerking, because those folks see people coming in, and trust me, they can tell when, John from the local ranch shows up to buy a thing of baling wire versus the family that rolls in, gets a few cans of sterno, a couple of sleeping bags, and a cheap pup tent. They know, right? And those are the folks you want to have call you and tell you, listen, I think I just saw a couple or a family or probably an adult. I show up, they're buying this stuff, maybe experiencing homelessness. We can engage there. We want to involve public figures here, right? We want them connected to the target cultures that are, that we know are out there. Those folks can be our figureheads. We can use them to convey the messages into those rural communities that this support is real, it's helpful, and it's available. We want to partner wherever possible with those agencies and organizations that do provide services to target populations. And now you want to think hospitals, ERs, jails. I said day labor. Here's another one, plasma banks. Plasma banks are awesome because people go there for some quick cash, right? Libraries are really important because you have access to to the internet, okay? You have access to Wi-Fi and you can get online. Community action programs, even places like fast food outlets, because here's the deal. I can remember when I was homeless, I used to go to Arby's at about 9:30 at night because they were getting ready to throw out their pies. And man, if you got there at the right time, you might get 5 or 6 of them bomb cherry pies that they made. And you would be thinking you were living in a lap of luxury with all those cherry pies. So it's just, thinking way outside the box and thinking about how people are going to get by, and get their needs met when you can't see any resources available to you. You must, it's not, you must make connections with the staff at places like those convenience, hardware, liquor, grocery, sporting goods stores, the laundromats. Check in regularly about it. Those should be part of your weekly route of engagement. And every one of those places, if you don't have business cards, get some, because you should be leaving them in every one of those places. And remember I said earlier about creating a route? The route is really important because often folks can't find you. They don't have your phone number. They don't have a phone. They don't even care about having a phone. They just need socks. They just need something. And if they can't find you, they'll find their resource elsewhere, right? So we want to be there every week in the same place. That means, I'm not saying every day you have exactly the same route. What I did on Monday, I had this route. On Tuesday, I had this route. And then I'd go back to my Monday route, and I'd go back to my Tuesday route with each day, so that every time folks needed to find me, they knew, oh, it's Tuesday, Steven's going to be at the Downtown Partnership at, and I was there. That's really important because folks they can't call you, and they're not going to be on your schedule, right? They're going to be on their schedule. And if you're not there at, on Wednesday when they are, at least they'll know how to find you. The final thing I'll say, there's 2 pieces here that I think are really important. I talked about the faith-based piece. They do a lot of homeless service work, food pantries, they bring meals, they have clothing resources. That should be absolutely on your weekly route. And then you also really want to identify school officials who have that, who do the flagging for, a potential student being homeless. Those are really important folks to know, because they can alert you to, we've got a student here who's experiencing homelessness. If it's a student who's homeless, there's a parent somewhere, or there's a family somewhere that is also experiencing homelessness. You can count on it. When you are out there in the country, there are certain things, and guys, you're going to have to stop me because I can't see the clock, and I don't want to go over. So just, you give me a nudge when you need me to stop talking. But finding our brothers and sisters. So the first thing we got to do is we got to recognize the signs of habitation, right? Campgrounds work, the designated ones and informal ones. And all I mean by informal ones is wherever you put a camp up. Transportation and service providers, buses, cabs, Meals on Wheels, home health care, the railroad lines. These are all places we're going to find people experiencing homelessness. 12-step meetings, because people are trying to get housing ready. 90 meetings in 90 days before we'll talk to you about, housing. People are trying that, even when it's like the most insane thing for them to try and do in the middle of experiencing homelessness. They'll do it because it means a potential home. Absolutely, whenever possible, pair with somebody who's experienced or is formerly homeless. What I got from Bone and from Donna, both, was instant cred I borrowed from them when we showed up at another camp. Everybody knew Bone and Donna. They didn't necessarily know me, but they knew these 2 folks. And because of that, I came right into the camp with them, never felt threatened, never had a problem. use your brothers and sisters with that background. They'll get you in the door, so to speak, and their credibility will carry you until you establish your own cred. I've said it before, consistent routes, contacts, week after week after week. Stay consistent. Leave your business card everywhere. You raise awareness in every community that you serve, and sometimes that just, you can show up at the library with a flyer. Just do what you need to with the folks that you're working with, librarians, the local hardware store, that will help to continue to raise awareness about homelessness. This one's big, folks. Under promise and over deliver. Ain't nothing worse than being promised something by an outreach worker and never seeing that outreach worker again. Can you imagine how devastated you would be sitting on that bench waiting for somebody to bring you a meal, bring you a pack of cigarettes, bring you, a thing of socks, and they never show up? Under promise and over deliver, and it will make you look like you've gone the extra mile, because in many ways you have. Vary your hours of operation, and all I mean by that is do not deviate when you do those routes. Stay consistent in time and on the route, but you can start working at 10 and end at 7, or you can start working at 4 a.m. and end at 2. You just don't end at quitting time. And what I mean by that is sitting, on a bench somewhere with somebody, you look at your watch and it's almost 5 o'clock, and you're like, well, you know what? Sorry, we're going to continue this tomorrow. It's quitting time for me. It's Miller time. Do you know what that would sound like to somebody experiencing homelessness, and what it would feel like that you weren't worthy enough for this person whose job it is to support you or help you has just left you because it's quitting time? That's really painful.
Stephen, I'm going to provide that nudge right now.
I got it. I'll stop there.
Because it's almost quitting time here on our podcast. I just, just listening to you and the passion, but also the really concrete suggestions and resources, places to go is all, in my view, very helpful. I'm wondering in the last few minutes, those of you on the call, what thoughts, questions you have, and then we'll bring it to a close. Anything at all? While you are thinking about that, I'm just going to give you a preview of a document and some slides that you're more than welcome to look at. These are called the core elements of effective street outreach for people experiencing homelessness. This is a United States Interagency Council document. If we had a few more hours or days, we would go through all this with you. There's a lot to talk about, but I think hopefully the basic gist of what you were seeking has been met here. But I just want to say that these are the topical areas about making our efforts systematic and coordinating, which Stephen spoke to so eloquently about coordinating with all these different eyes and ears in the community. Remembering that we want to be housing focused in everything we do to the extent possible, make it a housing first attempt. We have to be trauma informed and culturally responsive. Again, Stephen gave great examples of that, and reduce harm and emphasize safety. And so we will invite you to look at these other slides and also send you the document if you haven't looked at it already. I think it's a great kind of discussion piece for you all to think about as a team as you move forward. So any other comments from anyone at all?
I just threw it into the chat box, Ken, but please let us know what you thought of today's presentation by filling out our evaluation for today's training. The link is right there in the chat box. And then we'll also be following up with an email that will have the link for our certificates for today's training as well.
We do have a few minutes yet. Anyone at all, or shall we leave it there?
I do want to say thank you as well. I grew up in Chicago and I'm in Fargo now. So I'm kind of appreciating some of the things you guys talked about, like the dance with grace. Everybody dances differently. I never learned to dance, so I can't dance with grace. And then something about acknowledging how you make a person feel who's homeless, or trying to engage him. And I had a guy today who was trembling, and I thought he was having some alcohol withdrawals. I begged him to go to the hospital, and he said, I make him nervous. So I have to acknowledge what I bring to the table and how I make a person feel. And I asked him, told him I'm sorry, but what you were talking about made me want to add even more, take a giant step back about how I usually deal with people and how I have to approach them in the future.
Beautiful.
Thank you for those words. We can have the best of intentions, but we never quite know how things land with the other party. And so we have to be on the lookout for that.
I just want to thank you both, Ken and Stephen, for providing this information. I know it's going to be so beneficial for our staff that attended today, in addition to others that are going to be able to access the webinar in the future. I just think it's such a good reminder of different things we can do, because I just didn't even think about the library. And I know some other people had commented on different things that they hadn't thought of either. So it's just really helpful to have your guys' experience and guidance, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Tammy, we actually have some handouts that we'll send you that have some of these listed concrete examples. We'll pull those together and make sure we send those. But yeah, thank you for those.
That would be great. I'll forward that on.
That's wonderful. And Jerry, I saw your comment. You're going on outreach again tomorrow. It's fun to see those around town and getting used to our schedule. Yes, like we are, they recognize us like we are old friends coming to visit. I have the chills from that, because that's exactly it, right? That to me says people know that what you're doing, why you're there, and they will share that. That's just beautiful. What a great way to end this today. Thank you. Fabulous.
Well, thank you all. And Stephen in particular, thank you for bringing your wisdom, expertise, lived experience forward and putting it out there. So appreciate that.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Please note Lee's invitation here. And with that, we'll say farewell.
Thank
And
you.
happy Wednesday.